Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Um, I am Sahar Farajnia, the scientific editor of the Data Science Journal of Cell Press. And I'm talking to you from Amsterdam, so it is 2 a.m. for me. Please uh, blame my social jet lag if I do anything weird or I say anything strange. So today we are going to discuss the challenges in the implementation of AI in health monitoring and medicine. And then here with me are my colleagues, Miao Chi Desai. Miao, I hope I told your name correctly. She is the scientific editor of Cell. And also our three panelists, Dr. Erich Huang, Dr. Carmen Poon, and Dr. James Zhu. So I just briefly introduce our panelists. Dr. Erich Huang is director of the Duke University Center for Health Data Science, director of Duke's Data Science Accelerator, and assistant dean for biomedical informatics for Duke University School of Medicine. His research is mainly focused on applied machine learning and data infrastructure. Dr. Carmen Poon is an assistant professor at the Department of Surgery of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and her work is mainly concentrated on wearable and implantable body sensors. And Dr. James Zhu is an assistant professor of biomedical data science at Stanford University. His work is mainly on making machine learning more reliable, human compatible, and statistically rigorous, with applications in human disease and health. So by saying that, let's start the discussion. So I want to start the first question as that, what are some of the primary problems where AI can really make progress over the next 5-10 years, and where are we likely to see benefits for healthcare and health management? Or in other words, is AI going to fundamentally change our models of care in the near and middle future, or not? So please, panelists, if one of you starts the discussion.
Maybe I'll start, coming from a healthcare environment. And just a minor correction, currently my role is actually the Chief Science and Innovation Officer at Onduo, which is one of the Verily subsidiaries. But what I will say is—
Thanks for correcting me. This is 2 a.m. effect, sorry.
No problem, no problem. I just want to make sure that people know that I actually now am in the private sector. But one thing I would say is, as someone who was an executive officer in a health system, what I would suggest actually is somewhat counterintuitive answer to your question, in that I think perhaps underexploited is, most people want to use AI to do diagnosis. Most people want to use AI or ML to do treatment. What I'd argue, especially in the United States, and I will note that the United States is probably a little bit different than other countries in this way, but I will say that it's generalizable that healthcare is one of the most complex things we do, as any sort of developed country does. And because of that, there's a lot of task load for our clinicians and our nurses. And what I would say is that even though we should absolutely be working on diagnostic problems, we should absolutely be working on therapeutic problems, low-hanging fruit is actually a lot of the workload problems that we have. There are a lot of, especially in the United States, because so much documentation has to go into healthcare delivery. So much of that documentation is tied to reimbursement and things like that, that if we can actually offload a lot of those tasks to machine learning, and honestly, the stakes of machine learning in those settings is not quite as fraught as it is in diagnostic or therapeutic settings, there's a ton of opportunity for us to think about how we use, algorithms to minimize that task load for these busy clinicians. Because it's arguable that physicians are amongst the most highly paid sort of data entry technicians that we have in any industrialized, society. And if we can actually offload a lot of that, then they can actually spend more of the time actually doing the human part, which is actually seeing, talking to, examining their patients. So I'm not saying that to the exclusion of these important things like diagnosis and treatment, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of underrepresented opportunity for us to use machine learning in healthcare.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just also want to echo Erich that I think that is a really interesting and high impact area of machine learning. For example, one of the things we've been exploring is like triaging patients, right? Using machine learning AI algorithms to see which patients are the highest priority and should be seen immediately. So I've also consult and work with like Amazon Care, which is sort of rolling out its own healthcare system across the US. And actually like, triaging is one of the big issues that come up. Yeah.
Yes.
I guess in addition to that, maybe also want to highlight maybe potentially like telehealth. That's one area where you see machine learning can potentially have quite large impact in the short term and also in the medium term, right? Especially with the pandemic, as many of you have seen that there's just an explosion of telehealth. For example, here at Stanford, like the amount of digital visits increased by over 50-fold over the last 2 years, right? And it could potentially be really transformative for the patient-clinician interactions, right? And telehealth is, I think, also relatively well suited for machine learning in the sense that a lot of the data is already digital, right? So it's already sort of digital interface between the patient and doctor, so it's well suited for a lot of the more computer vision-based AI algorithms.
Yeah, I actually think that telehealth was actually an area that got improved a lot during the pandemic, because before that we were always hesitating, should we do that? Is it ethically correct? What infrastructure we need? But then pandemic forced us to go in a pilot mode and try it. And I think, as you said, that telehealth can be very useful, especially like in rural, faraway areas that doctors, like specialists, cannot be there, but there are like maybe a general doctor based there and can get help from specialists in other areas, because we can't have many specialists to be in different areas. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Carmen, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just want to add on to the topic. Sorry, before I begin, I will just make a small minor revision as well. So I'm also working in the private sector now. Like I was with CU Surgery, but now primarily on running my own spin-off. But on AI in medicine, I think one interesting area that our group would be interested in is, I think in the past, a lot of these work actually AI are mainly implemented to have new delivery mode of healthcare, or even replace some of the tedious work that the clinicians can don't have the time to do, or we don't want them to waste their time to do. But I think in the future, we can also look into ways when clinicians or we communicate with these AI systems so that we treat them as another entity to provide us new information, new insight that helps us to advance disease biology and others. I think that will be interesting. But especially like in these years when I visited many different publishers or different groups, they are also working on AIs in medicine. I saw a lot of very interesting AI system. So they are not just one. I don't think we will see one perfect AI system coming out, but there will be many, and they become a strong task workforce, that we can make use of in the future. That I would say it's already there, just how we can integrate better with the current system.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Very interesting. But Carmen,
It's a quick question.
yeah, go on.
So this is Miao from Cell. I'm just curious because all of you kind of mentioned that you now move to private sector in the industry, or at least working part-time in the industry. So, I mean, we are talking about AI, future medicine, right? Future medicine. So I'm just wondering that there must be many different stakeholders in this direction. And from the basic research point of view, right? So we want to advance the innovation or advance of the AI in healthcare. How do you see academic plays this role, and how do you see industry play this role in this direction?
It's a really interesting question, and you're right pointing out, hey, how come you guys are all either consulting or working in the private sector? And and I grew up in academia. My father is an academic, physician. I was literally born, at the institution that I became faculty in as well. And what I would say is this is, there's no doubt that academia is great at generating ideas. And I actually think academic health systems have a very unique role because now you have universities fused to a hospital. So there's a lot of cross, fertilization that can go on in a setting where you have computer science departments right next to, a department of medicine or a department of surgery. I think that's really important. One thing that I would say that healthcare is not super good at, and probably academic healthcare is not really good at, is scaling. We are very good at, when I look at my institution that I just left, Duke Health, we are very good at optimizing for our local situation. All health systems are very good at doing that. Now, can they actually build scalable systems? That's another problem that, academia just doesn't tend to focus on. And it's frankly, maybe boring to academics. So I'll be honest, that's part of my motivation for, joining an Alphabet company, because Alphabet has obviously proven it can scale. Alphabet needs to learn healthcare, and I'm saying we're still learning healthcare. I'm not going to say that big tech has done everything that it needs to do in healthcare, but I do think that big tech knows how to scale. And, you think about like Amazon, who James is consulted with. They've basically took internal systems, and white labeled them, and it became Amazon Web Services. And that is, certainly the prototype for scalable technology that other people can use. That's, I think, where the private sector is really helpful. And that blend of academic, and, I think all of us are moving back and forth between academia and the private sector. I think that shows that we need that the ideas, but we also need that scalability.
Yeah, we need the collaborations between the two. Yeah, go ahead, Carmen, please.
Yes. I just want to add to what Erich said is, I believe when we first work in, I have been in academic for many years, right? When we first carry on some of these projects, I think the grant agency and evaluator, one of the major concerns is, will this be used by the healthcare sector? They don't want it to be a single prototype system that used by a single doctor, which I think that makes sense, right? They fund something, yes. They want it to bring real impact to the clinical setting, and that can't be done in one single hospital, in one single clinic, and especially for AI, I think one of the major objectives for AI is to make it available to other people who don't have this kind of specialization skills and all these. So that's why we carry and try to launch our own works through some of these spin-off companies. Another issue, I think, it's, in academic, the turnover, it's quite fast. We work with my students, we work with some of my RAs, they have to move on, because the setting in that academic, it's not favorable for them to develop and grow, especially nowadays. If you graduate from your own institute, I think you hardly get a good position in the near future in the same institute, because they want diversity and all these. So some of my colleagues, because of family issues, because of many issues, they have to move on to other places which no longer locate in Hong Kong or no longer locate in Chinese U. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to have this kind of flexible company setting. Okay, so we can still link up with each other to carry on our research, but at the same time seeing opportunities if we can really implement some of our ideas into the real world. Okay, so I think that's the main reason why we move from academic. Actually, I would say it's currently somewhat like a bridge, okay, in the middle, okay, because I still involve a lot in a lot of academic activities and all these, okay. Just I don't have to report to Chinese U.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah, go on, James.
I was going to say that I think academics still has a very important role to play, right, in this intersection of AI and healthcare. And I think in particular, I think a lot of the early stage discoveries and piloting of the algorithms is still much easier to do at the universities. Right? For example, like one model that we've taken is we'll try to identify some problems and try to do relatively early stage development of the algorithms and do some prospective clinical studies just here locally at Stanford hospitals. Right? And that can be done much more quickly, and we can release the data, make it openly available, make it open source, and actually release the code and the data. Right. But when we talk about more later stage of actually scaling this up and running clinical trials to test these algorithms, then that becomes easier to do as like a startup or a venture-backed company or in collaboration with larger pharma companies. Right. So maybe there's like the early stage work is still where academics can still contribute a lot to.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to the next question, I just want to announce that if the audience have any question, they can put it in the chat or Q&A, and then we can ask it from the panelists. But then going back to our discussion, what do you think are some of the main challenges of AI development for medicine and health monitoring? Like, for example, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I think one is like how to properly evaluate AI models before deployment. I think that's still one really critical challenge, right? So recently we actually did a survey of all of the medical AI systems that were approved by the FDA. There's like 100 plus of these medical AI systems. And actually, we just looked at how were they evaluated before they were approved by the FDA. And it turned out that's all of them, except for 4, right, 126 out of 130, were only evaluated on sort of retrospective data, right? So that means that data is already previously collected as a benchmark data set, and then the algorithm was developed and then applied to this data set, right? So that means that there's no human in the loop evaluation of those data sets of the model. And oftentimes the data set comes from one location, right? Maybe from the same location where the algorithm was trained, where they actually do the evaluation. And I think one challenge with AI that we all know well is that the model's performance can actually vary quite a bit, depends on the context where it's applied, maybe across different hospitals, different settings. Right? So just basically just having this one-time, one-site retrospective evaluation can potentially mask a lot of the limitations and biases of these algorithms.
Yeah, very, very interesting point. So actually, yeah, maybe because at the moment we have data that is also not perfect, like we have maybe incomplete electronic health record or data that is not still digital, and we're trying to digitalize it. We maybe need to create new data for future algorithms, like be mindful of how we are creating and digitalizing data from now on. That is the best to use it in the future.
Yeah, so Sahar, you raise a good point, and I think I was going to connect it to the data as well, because I think what James points out is we see significant variability in model performance depending on the setting. And again, the problem is most people probably overfit or almost definitely overfit their models for some local circumstance. And one of the reasons why that's the case, so it's not sexy, It's not methodology. It's just that we don't have data standards, especially in healthcare delivery. There's a lot of effort towards moving towards data standards, and I'm going to say it's really hard work, right?
Yeah.
So in the United States, probably one of the last really bipartisan pieces of legislation was called the 21st Century Cures Act, which passed actually right at the end of the Obama administration. And in the 21st Century Cures Act, they actually mandated in the United States that we start using a data interoperability standard called the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Standard. It's not really a standard, it's more like a framework for data. But what it's calling out for is the fact is every electronic health record in the United States is sort of a snowflake. It's very unique. They're often highly customized to those specific hospitals. And so even if a large majority of the United States uses a specific vendor like Epic, all those different Epic instances are pretty different, which means that those data are not really interoperable with one another. And the cliche that a data scientist spends 90% of her time cleaning up and curating the data before they can actually get to modeling it's true. So then once you've gone through that effort of curating these data from your single institution, you built your model and now it's overfit to that single institution. So I do think that there's a policy thing that we need to start really pushing, and 21st Century Cures Act has tried to start that, is that we need to embrace interoperability. Now, interoperability is not magic. We can't just wave a wand and say everyone use FHIR FHIR and everything will work, because now we need to actually develop community standards there, because FHIR is going to be, everyone will just do it a siloed version of a FHIR data model again. So there needs to be incentive for us to push data to, between institutions so that they actually can sort of be sanded down and refined over time so that they really do become interoperable. But that requires a policy component, and people only do what they're sort of paid to do. We need to figure out in the United States, for example, how do we incentivize people to actually really exchange data with one another in a really transparent way? And then the machine learning is going to concomitantly improve as that data ecosystem improves.
Right. In Hong Kong, we have quite a different situation. Okay, so because in Hong Kong, I think 90% of over 90% of the population's health is supported by the government. So it's a public centralized system. Okay. So in terms of records and all these, most of the time they are quite standardized. Okay, so that part is easier. Okay, in terms of getting AI data for training AI and all these. Okay, but the other difficulty we have is sometimes I found it difficult to engage all relevant stakeholders. Okay, because we know we have to have the support or the interest of the clinicians to use and run all these AI systems. Okay, they have reservation. Okay, because many of them do not have a very strong engineering or data science background. So to them, it's really a black box. Okay, I think when people mention it's a black box, most of the time it's because they don't have the full knowledge to understand how neural networks and all these algorithms works. Okay, so they read and then they read only the numbers. Okay, so especially when some of these algorithms, they are actually not readily available to them. Okay, so they can only use read the paper. They may have to re-implement, which they won't spend those time. Okay, so in that sense, they don't have interest. Okay. So to me, I think if we can come up with a collaboration plan that actually all stakeholders find beneficial, okay, I think that will move the field a lot faster. Especially, I think it's important that when we bring up these kind of algorithms, we have to make sure at least they don't bring much extra efforts to them. Okay, now with all those false positives and discrepancies between the AI system or different AI system with the clinicians, they find it hard to determine what to do next. Okay, so they rather rely on their own decision, which I think it's completely makes sense. Okay, but I think with time, when many of them start to understand what's happening, when they collaborate with AI, they know what they can do, what they cannot do, then they can start trusting in them. Because at the end, signing that sheet or providing information to the patient or being liable to the decision, it's the clinician, not the AI system nor the engineer, right? So I think they are careful. I think this is important.
I think Carmen makes a really important point. I just want to follow up on that, because right now I think almost all of the AI algorithms are optimizing for the wrong objectives when they're being developed, right? If you think about how AI is developed, especially in healthcare, right? So it's often trying to optimize to improve its performance on a static data set, right? Maybe I want to get the highest accuracy for chest X-ray classification, right? But as Carmen mentioned, like how the algorithms are actually used are not in isolation on a static data set, but they're actually often used as a second reader or in some team of algorithm plus human users, right? So the actual objective function that we actually care about, right, is how much does the algorithm enhance the performance of the human decision maker, not how much does the algorithm, how accurate is the algorithm by itself. And we have actually done a lot of these human AI experiments, like dozens of experiments, where we've seen quite surprisingly that oftentimes you have AI algorithms that are worse by the standard machine learning metrics, but are actually better for the humans in terms of helping the human to make better decisions, helping human clinicians to make better decisions at the end, right? That's resulting from the fact that there is actually a fundamental mismatch between how we're currently training these models and how they're actually being used in practice.
Yeah, I love that you made that point, James. I can brag about it because it was prior to my joining an alphabet company, but I think one of the better sort of machine learning papers in healthcare was actually one out of Google Health for the diabetic retinopathy. And the reason is not that it's great at diagnosing diabetic retinopathy. They were very, very conscious when they chose their objective was referable diabetic retinopathy. So it was designed to refer to a trained clinician. And so that I think that's really important. And I think we should try to replace the A in artificial intelligence with more like assistive or augmented intelligence. And that, yes, even if the algorithm may by itself seem to have inferior performance, if somehow the user experience of that AI in conjunction with humans actually leads to better, total performance, I think that's really where we want to go, because we don't want to cut the human out of the loop. I'll be honest with you, you want to go to a good doctor, right? You don't want to go to a computer for your healthcare. You want to go to a good doctor. Now you want the computer to help your doctor take better care of you, but you don't want that computer to replace that person. And I think a lot of people sort of, it's understandable. You want to beat the human, and then a lot of those earlier papers were framed in that way. And I love that James brought up that combination, because I think that's really where the money is when it comes to the synergy between humans and machines.
Yeah, thank you. So, Carmen, when you were talking, it just came to my mind, like there is a kind of like for clinicians, because they're not data scientists, of course, it is a black box. And then there might be moments that there is disagreement between the clinician and the AI. So how we can resolve that disagreement?
Sometimes I think we have to be careful. Okay, first, okay, I would definitely say whenever there are differences, I would take it a further thought or second thought to sometimes may not be a simple answer. Okay, may not be somebody, the clinician is right, the AI system is wrong. Just that I think they may be pointing towards different things. Okay, I know we all make mistakes. Okay, clinician makes mistakes as well. AI system makes mistakes. Okay, I think this we have to admit. So that's why I think this kind of collaboration or hand-in-hand work style actually makes a lot more sense. I wouldn't say the clinician should just shut up their brain and blindly follow the decision of the AI system. But whenever he prompts you something, okay, then you should think, give it a second thought why there are differences between the two. Maybe it's because humans are not completely knowledgeable about the subject. This is possible, okay? Maybe because of tiredness, silly mistakes, maybe because of other things, or maybe because the AI system were never taught on something, okay? He never learned some topic, so that's why he doesn't know that topic. And then he makes a mistake. I think all these are possible, okay? So it's no simple answer to how to deal with it, okay? But I would definitely say if clinicians, you work with the AI system, try to understand him, okay? Not to kick him out of your office right away, because I know many clinicians do that. Okay, they said, "Oh, this is dumb." Okay, it's not as skillful as I am. It's not as knowledgeable as I am. But I would say, if you're willing to spend time with him, okay, maybe he can help in various ways.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question about these mismatches, Sahar, that you asked, and this is also where, if the models can give some notion of confidence and maybe some additional explanations for why it made certain predictions, then that can help the clinicians to adjudicate and potentially reach like a consensus, right? If the model says, here's my prediction, but I'm not actually really sure about the prediction, then that's actually a useful piece of information for the human decision makers.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, honestly, in clinical medicine, no matter if you're a master clinician, we all have sort of confidence intervals in our head about when we're making a clinical decision, right? I honestly think that's one of the things we learn in medical school and we learn in our residency training, is that you are actually constructing some sort of surrogate of a confidence interval internally whenever you make a clinical decision. So it is significant cognitive dissonance when you have an algorithm that gives you a point prediction. And it doesn't tell you, certainly some people who pay attention and ought to really try to figure out ways to display confidence in a prediction. But in many cases, we find that doesn't happen. And I think what that's sort of speaking to, and actually it's a commentary I published in one of your sister journals, is that we need to think about the user interface of AI, the UI of AI, because I think part of the reason why there's possibly going to be sort of rejection of AI in clinical settings is exactly that. It's like no one actually has thought, what does the end user need to see? What buys the trust of an end user? And ironically, I would say end users, clinicians, would have more trust in algorithms if the algorithms actually express how uncertain they are about a prediction. That actually earns more trust. I actually find my colleagues more credible if they don't say something with absolute confidence, because I know in medicine, if I treat a patient and do everything right by whatever the clinical practice guidelines are, whatever the published literature says, there still are cases where we have a bad outcome. But just because human biology is just so complex. So anyone who says that they will absolutely confidently do exactly the right thing for that patient, I actually lose confidence in them. And the same thing would happen with an algorithm.
Yeah, I also get suspicious when my human collaborators are overconfident on every question.
Yeah,
True.
very good.
Actually, some of the clinicians actually tells me that, we do this extra step because we are not confident enough. Okay, so I think this actually happens to AI and also happens to the clinicians.
Yeah, okay. So now you're talking about confidence, how we can ensure that users have the appropriate level of confidence in AI models. I think it's very important, like the users can be clinicians and also patients. Like, of course, they should also trust if a doctor is making a decision based on an algorithm. So how we can ensure that this trust and confidence is there?
I think there has. Oh, sorry, James. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Erich.
I do think, and I love that James previously mentioned that, you know, out of his research group, they make the code available. There's a culture in machine learning of transparency. I think as we adopt, you know, these tools in healthcare settings, I do think that we're going to have to earn that trust via transparency, right? I think if we show and demonstrate that humans working in conjunction with algorithms can actually get an additional bump in performance, that will earn some trust from people. If we just, you know, we can sort of conceal the fact that an algorithm was a significant part of the decision making, I think that will actually come back and sort of hurt us in the end. So we do need, and medicine in general probably can still improve in sort of its transparency and decision making in general, but I would say especially in conjunction with algorithms, because we've already seen cases, and you know, Ziad Obermeyer at Berkeley had published a great study of an algorithm being used in a hospital in the United States where, because of the, you know, a lack of transparency into how the healthcare utilization data are actually used differently by different sort of socioeconomic groups, there was a clear identification that algorithm discriminated against, you know, certain ethnic groups, and we need to shine a light on those situations so that we can improve. And I think, you know, so my title when I was at Duke was Chief Data Officer for Quality, and there's a whole process of quality improvement, which is standard in healthcare. We acknowledge that the care we deliver is not perfect, and that we actually have to continuously assess it and improve it. No different than when we start using algorithms in healthcare. So I do think that we just need to just continue to adopt that kind of paradigm.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in our experience, it's often the biggest thing that we can do to enhance user trust is just to make the model much more accessible, right? Because right now, a lot of the biomedical healthcare machine learning models are actually not easily accessible, right? So you have to be a computer scientist to even if the code is accessible, you have to be a computer scientist to go to the GitHub and actually run the model and have different configurations. And oftentimes you have to have pretty significant compute resources to be able to use the models, right? And I think making the model just much easier to alleviate some of these overhead and make it very easy for non-computer scientists, for clinicians, just to be able to tinker with the model, right, in real time. I think that's actually could be really transformative for enhancing trust, right? Because that's how people gain trust. Is, you know, I gain trust in my car just because I play with it and drive it every day. And I think there are efforts now, quite large efforts, for example, from Hugging Face, from other companies, for actually releasing interfaces to the models that are, you know, zero code, right? So people can actually interact with the models on their browser in real time. And I think there's a push towards doing this more also for biomedical AI models.
Yes,
Okay.
This question, actually, it's interesting, okay, but I think we have to think in two ways. Because if we design based on the assumption that the users are the clinicians versus the assumption that the users are patients, okay, I think the design have to be entirely different. Especially we know, because I worked in the past a lot on wearable sensors, okay, ambulatory devices. Those devices, most of the time they have a complementary part that's used by clinicians. Okay, say for example blood pressure. Okay, when you measured it in the hospital, it's somewhat different. The whole design is somewhat
it's different from what the ambulatory blood pressure measuring devices that we are seeing at home nowadays. Okay, both can have their own AIs attached to it, but I think for clinicians, okay, they are in the mode of making decision. They know that they need to make a decision based on this kind of information. But for the patients, I think they rely very much on the device. But one observation I made is for many of these devices, when they first launched, okay, new devices, they were actually launched in the clinic, used by doctors. So they have several rounds of revising the device before a different version was used in the ambulatory setting, when they can collect a lot more information in a lot more different settings that supplement information to the clinicians. I think at the end, the outcome, okay, the guideline has to come from some clinical experts, health experts, who can actually advise the patients how to use them, these wearables, or these are the ambulatory devices at home, or else many people will lose interest, okay, because they don't actually know how to read or analyze those data. They will give up. But if AI can provide some kind of basic information to them, okay, or this, for example, at certain level, this is critical, you need to go see a doctor or something like that, that may be already helpful. But I think the scenario is very different in both in the two situations.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the next question, we should also be aware of time. We have about 20 minutes. I think this is very important. That what do you think are the main challenges for AI deployment in clinic, in clinical practice and personalized recommendation system? So, for example, personalization has been used widely in our daily life. Like, for example, we have these movie recommenders or music recommenders, or when you go shopping online, these shopping recommenders. So we are actually using them in our daily life. But what are the main issues in development and utilizing a personalized recommendation system in healthcare?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Because there's a general debate that's about how much personalization is good and how much personalization is maybe too much personalization, even for commercial things like Netflix or Amazon. And especially in healthcare, there's definitely a sweet spot, right? Because the whole premise of precision medicine, precision health, is that some amount of personalization, maybe using mutations or genotype of information of the patient, could be very useful. On the other hand, if we do too much personalization, then we essentially run into this long tail issue challenge with machine learning, which is that a lot of patients are fairly unique if you really go down to their medical records, and machine learning algorithms, at least the current algorithms by its nature, do not really work very well on the heavy tail part of the distribution. Right? They need to have a lot of examples that look similar. Right? So if it becomes too personalized, then the algorithm are more prone to make mistakes. And there are also additional challenges like potential biases, right? So lack of fairness in the algorithm that can arise if it becomes too personalized, if it's using maybe some of the more sensitive demographic features like gender or race or some protected attributes.
Yeah, maybe we need some kind of clinical validation to see whether like the extreme is n equals 1 or n equals infinity, right? Or maybe some subgroups, then n will be 10, 20, 30, and then but we have 7 groups. But we have to have some kind of innovative clinical protocols or clinical trials to validate that indeed, if we subdivide the patients and personalize in some sense, that it helps to give a better outcome than we treat them as one single whole group. But I think that I'm not a clinician, okay, so maybe that kind of study is difficult to carry out. But I think without that, it's very difficult to convince people that complete personalization it's needed in many of these healthcare systems or healthcare problems.
I agree, and especially, you know, the point James made is that there's two sides to the personalization coin. There's, yes, you know, there's that ideal of personalized medicine or precision medicine, but then there's the other side of that is to actually start discriminating against people in a certain way, or treating, you know, people based on sensitive variables in a certain way that ultimately leads to detrimental outcomes. And we've seen that in other parts of technology, right? You know, Facebook, you know, you can exquisitely target your ads, and that's been used for good purposes sometimes, but also been used for terrible purposes. And it's an exquisitely powerful tool, but it also has significant side effects if it's used, you know, without you know, being used in a measured way. So I do think we have to be careful about how we think about personalization. The thing too is when we compare ourselves to other industries like shopping or Netflix or whatever. So I will be annoyed when Netflix sort of suggests a movie to me that I'm not really interested in. If some sort of therapeutic or diagnostic maneuver was recommended and it could potentially cause harm, the stakes are much higher. Exactly. And so I really do think we have to be careful about that, and be very aware of the sort of the dual sort of nature of that very powerful capability. I feel probably a little bit more comfortable if we think about mutations and genomes, but again, even when we talk about genomes, there ultimately can be an overlay of you know, ethnicity or things like that as well. So I just think we have to be very careful when we think about it.
Yeah, very important point. Like of course, precision medicine is a very powerful tool to help group of patients to get more efficient treatment. But as you said, we have to look at it we have to look at the side effects, and benefits and side effects are coming always together. So for closing the discussion, because we are almost at time, I would like to ask you that what is the most important next major challenge to address towards implementation of AI in the near future? What do you think is our next most important challenge?
I have something that's maybe a little bit out of left field, because it's going to talk more about people than it's going to talk about technology. I think that algorithms are going to be such an important component of healthcare that we actually have to think about how we train humans to build algorithms and integrate algorithms into healthcare. So I don't think that that's just, you know, stamping out computer science majors. I think there's even the possibility, you know, when you look at the history of medicine, we've created subspecialties because, you know, we've realized that there's a domain that really needs specialization, whether it's pathology, radiology, surgery, many different flavors of surgery. You know, you can be a urologic surgeon, you can be, you know, a general surgeon. I think that, you know, one thing we need to think about is if we want to professionalize the process of building algorithms and using them in healthcare, we actually have to think about, do we have a cadre of people who can actually do that and know enough about the sort of the daily workflows of clinical care delivery. I'm not saying that this is to the exclusion of the computer sciences, but what I'm saying is that we need clinicians who sort of can serve as the translators of this really powerful promise in clinical medicine. And I think it's an instrument no different than, you know, a radiologist would treat an MRI or a CT scanner as an instrument, or a surgeon treats, you know, a gastrointestinal stapling device. So that's my out of left field thing, you know, and challenge to the field is that, do we need to think about how we train clinicians specifically in the specialty of using algorithms for healthcare delivery.
Yeah, very, very interesting point. So what do you think, James?
Yeah, so I think one really interesting challenge going forwards, I think, is the phenomenon that data are becoming increasingly commoditized, right? They're becoming like products by itself. Right? So for example, Amazon and other places that put up like data markets, or similar to how you can buy clothing or books from Amazon, you can also buy data sets, right, for people's wearable data, people's health data. And there are also a lot of companies, for example, like Flatiron, right, whose business model is really in curating data from cancer patients and creating a data asset and then selling that data asset to Roche, to Genentech, right, in this case for like several $1 billion. And I think that's like a really interesting trend in the broader data science ecosystems, that the data is now becoming these commodities. People realize that data are very useful, especially in healthcare, right, very valuable. And they're being bucketed into different data products and being commercialized, being bought and sold. And I think that has tremendous implications for the AI algorithms that are being built on top of those data, right? Because the fact that the data becomes commodities means that it's less transparent for individual data producers, like individual patients, of how their data is being used, right? The fact that data becoming these products, being bundled as products, means that there could be more biases in data from certain sources, right? For certain types of patients being used more by the companies, right? And also the fact that only certain companies are able to afford these very expensive data sets, right? Flatiron costs $2 billion to purchase by Roche, right? So I think this is actually a really interesting trend that could have tremendous implications for the broader health AI system.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very, very important point. But Carmen, if I ask you the same question, like being aware of your field, wearable sensors, what do you think are the most important challenges in the near future for analyzing or collecting data using wearable sensors?
Yes. I think actually they are very common. Okay, major challenges are common, quite common in AI for medicine. Okay, regardless of whether it's wearables or it's genomics or other type of imaging. And one thing I actually agree with both speakers is I think one thing it's on training the relevant personnel. Okay, most of the time I would say it's we need people who can manage or at least have deeper knowledge on both topics. Okay, on the healthcare topics as well as on the relevant topics on AI. Then okay, I think the collaboration has to have clearer roles between the two groups. Like you have to understand others, but you also have to have a clear role in that kind of collaboration, like what you want to do. But in terms of bringing this kind of technology into realization, I think this goal, this common vision have to be the same, but you have to have knowledge in both ends. Okay. On the other hand, on data collection and all these, okay, I think it's related, okay, because nowadays sometimes I think some of the engineers rely on clinicians to collect the data. They actually don't know what kind of data, what is the objective that they should be used to train the model. They may have very good skills, okay, like this kind of AI models, that kind of new algorithms, different types of training strategies and all these, okay, but they actually do not have a clear objective in most of the time. So their AI system, when they design, they work on problems that maybe at the end the clinicians think it's actually useless in their domain, okay. But on the other hand, okay, on the data collection, the clinicians sometimes will get back to the scientists, the engineers, and ask what kind of data you need. Okay, they don't know what they need to train their models. So I think this kind of misunderstandings actually come from because you do not have good understanding of what your partners are requiring. Okay, and this takes time. I think it takes time, and that's a great challenge. Okay, I would say even for wearables. Okay, I think because some of the times nowadays, okay, you have very nice devices. Okay, but they prompt you, especially for wearables, they prompt continuous signals that actually just massive of data that the clinicians would like to avoid. Okay, they prefer a single number, a single simple feedback from the device rather than very complicated graphs. Okay, this rising, that dropping, and all these. Okay, so I think this kind of messages actually tells us that we have to have clearer roles but better understanding between the different parties.
Yeah, very good point. I was actually when you were talking, I was thinking, okay, you say that we have to make the roles clearer for each party actually being involved in this process, like data creation, data curation, and actually using the data for an algorithm. Any tips how we can do that, or that the systems can do that?
This is a really important problem, because when people are amidst delivering healthcare, they're really not thinking about someone wants to use my data to build an algorithm, right? They're just trying to get through their day. And the problem with many clinicians, and it doesn't matter whether in a single payer or a system like the United States, they're busy. I talk with colleagues in Singapore, they're busy. And so the data entry is very hurried. There's a classic, cliche in the United States that a clinician will come home from a long day in clinic, have dinner with the kids, get the kids in bed, and then go back to the electronic health record and continue, writing clinic
recording
notes. Right. And my guess is that burden is not an incentive for really crisp, data production, right? Data recording. And I think this is one of the opportunities that we have as a society, is how do we make it so that we can create a virtuous cycle where we make it easy for people to enter data in a good, good, cleaner data, because healthcare data is really messy. If we can figure out ways to do that, I do think that we'll see, better machine learning on the other end of that. And the other thing about that too is that we need to have a feedback loop, right? I think reCAPTCHA, for instance, is a really good example of how, Google gets us to help them, with their, machine learning by, asking us to log in, but also identify all the traffic lights in a picture. Can we do something similar in healthcare where we can, use that expert knowledge that clinicians have, make it really easy for them to really apply that expert knowledge and structure the data? I haven't figured out what that is yet. And we certainly don't have the sort of data ecosystem. The electronic health record is not a great, and another part of this is the electronic health record is a terrible data system. So I do think that one of the challenges for us is how do we build that? Right. And I would love for us to embrace that challenge as a society.
Making it even more difficult, it's I think because healthcare system, they actually sometimes work as a whole. Okay, so and in addition, I think different regions, they have different ways of dealing with the same problem, but it could be very different. Okay, just to give an example, like colorectal cancer screening, I know in the States, they do CTs and sometimes on other screening tests, but in Hong Kong, we seldom do that, okay? We use other test methods for screening for colorectal cancer. So, as a whole, okay, I think when you deal with the system, you have to understand the system as well. So sometimes it's you have to have the right partner to in mind, okay, when you want to launch in the near future, what type of algorithms that you want to use, okay, that partner, it's better to be your user, okay, because I know sometimes, especially from our domain, okay, people like downloading data sets, okay, I use online data sets as well, okay, I use their labels, I use and all these, but then when I get back to some of my partners, they said, oh, we don't use this kind of classification standards in Hong Kong, okay, so that's the differences, right, because if you do not talk to them in early enough, okay, then you may have wasted your efforts.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are on time. James, if you want to add something, maybe you can use this a few seconds.
Yeah, I think these are really important points. And in partly it's also, I think there are advances in machine learning itself that perhaps could address some of these issues, because the current machine learning is not very efficient in terms of transferring information from clinicians and experts to the algorithm. It does this by looking at a lot of examples. But there's a lot of recent, some quite exciting recent advances in using more natural language as a way to train machine learning models, right? Whereby maybe the pathologist would tell the algorithm that these enlarged nuclei, for example, are more likely to be cancerous, right? And that information, just in terms of natural language, could then be more efficient as a way to improve the algorithm. So instead of having to go to the EHR and find a lot of examples, maybe you can just, the clinician just talk to the algorithm like it's actually a student.
Yeah, thank you very much, all panelists. We used all our 1 hour. Thank you very much for joining us for a very nice hot discussion. And thanks, Miao, be there to back me up. Thanks all the audience for listening to us. We will have 15 minutes break, and then the last session of the conference will be starting. Good night. Yeah, for me it's night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.